as you mentioned, the title of the podcast, Lead By, that was one of my key learning points at that time, was that when nobody else stepped forward to take responsibility, I did. So I took responsibility for making it happen. There's been too much emphasis in the past decade or so about individuals building resilience. You must be more resilient, particularly in the conversations with women. And it's not the person that needs to be resilient, it's the system that needs to be resilient.
Lead by inspiring, lead by experience, lead by example, lead by. The Leadership Podcast brought to you by Izini. My name is Matt Stankham and I'm your host, bringing you thought-provoking, inspirational chat every month. Hear from leaders, business owners, coaches and subject matter experts from across a variety of industries. So however you consume your podcasts, turn up the volume, relax, and above all, enjoy this month's guest. Welcome back to another Lead By with me, Matt. Today, we're doing this virtually for a change, and I'm very lucky to have a really great guest with me today, Julia Muir, who's joining me remotely as well to talk about her leadership background and, more importantly, her journey through the automotive industry as a very seasoned individual. Julia, welcome, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. Thanks, Matt.
Pleasure, and thank you for doing this virtually. This is new for us because we normally do these in person, but this should be a lot of fun. And we've been hoping to have this conversation for quite a few months now, so it's great to finally get to this point where we're having a chat. And you are very well known in the industry, very accomplished, and in the leadership space, hugely passionate. So this seemed only right to have a great conversation with you about your background, your influence over the industry, and more importantly, your ambitions with one huge aspect of your career and your working life. So I'd love to start with just understanding a bit about you and your background, and let's form a great conversation about your leadership journey and ambitions. So tell me a little bit about where it all began, Julia, in your career.
Well, it all began many years ago, actually, when I was about 8 years old. I accompanied my dad on his car servicing business. So I would go out in the weekends or school holidays and do the service checklist, ticking off the various boxes as he was working on the cars. He's a fire service officer by trade, but as you probably know, they're not very well paid, so he had to supplement his income, so he trained to be a mechanic and was always mad about cars. So I kind of developed a similar interest from that age, and I was also handling the bookings at home with the bookings diary. So when it came to thinking about careers, I had quite a positive thought about the motor industry, about the people that worked in it and how interesting it was, that I was very interested in cars, not particularly about becoming an engineer or a technician myself, but the kind of, there weren't many industries at the time where there was a television program on every week where you watched people drive them and test drive them and stuff. So it kind of felt that it was quite an exciting industry to join.
Yeah.
So I actually started employment in the industry, proper employment, because I don't remember getting paid for the things I used to do for my dad. It was when I was a student at Nottingham. The motor retailer Perry's sent some people to look for graduate interns, and I thought, well, that sounds exciting. Perry's motor sales, you get a car, you get £7,000, a year. I thought that's great. Back in those days, I'm not going to remember exactly how many years it is, but it's a long time ago. And they interviewed me, and all my friends were like, "Why are you wanting to be a car salesperson?" And I was like, why not? I mean, to me, there was, it was like quite interesting and exciting job. And of course, they would say, well, women don't do that kind of thing. But then, luckily for me, Perez disagreed with them, and put me through all sorts of psychometric testing and assessments. And I remember the person that was doing the psychometric testing said, "You have a very interesting profile. You have this really high dominance profile and really low compliance."
Right.
Which usually means that you have a bit of an issue with authority. Well,
would your father have attested to that?
well, funnily enough, in those days, they would say there seems to be he actually said there's probably an issue with your relationship with your father about that, which is not true at all, because my dad is not a domineering person in any way. I said, "Well, no, it's just me. This is just me." So they offered me the role, and that's where it all started, as a graduate trainee at Perry's Doncaster, where I did every job in the dealership. And it was very well organised. It was an extremely professional process that I went through with, each department had got a list of criteria that you had to fulfil. You had to be able to prove competence to a certain standard on each of the tasks that you were given. Which, I thought, well, this is normal. And subsequently, for decades, I've still not seen such a professional way of training people in the business. I remember on my first day, the dealer principal said to me, "Well, you might think you're a bit clever, Julia, because you've been to university and the rest of us haven't." He says, "But this is the university of life." This is where you really start learning. And then he handed me the chamois level,
okay.
That's where we all start. And I thought, all right, I'll prove that I can do this. And I did well in the internship, went back, finished my degree, and then was offered a permanent role as a quality assurance manager, installing what was known then as BS 5750, which there was kind of a phase where everybody had to get a kite mark of quality, and that was what my job was, and that was really, really useful as a first kind of permanent job in the sector, because I had to map every process in the dealership and look for how to improve it, but also look for things like when you've got customer complaints or things go wrong, you have to put in an investigation as to why that is, and then put a corrective action process in place, which I think we would benefit from in many companies now if they still put in that kind of approach. So that was really my journey into the sector.
Yeah. So you started out watching your father being in the services as a fireman. Did you ever think that might have been a career choice? I know you were saying that it wasn't particularly well paid back then. Did you ever think that was something that you might have wanted to explore?
Yeah, I did. I mean, mainly because I was quite interested in doing jobs that I wasn't really supposed to do. So the fact that there were no female firefighters, you couldn't be one, meant that obviously I wanted to be one. But then you kind of find that the reality means no, you simply can't. But it kind of, as a youngster, you think, well, that's just not fair, is it? Why is that? Why is that there are certain opportunities closed to certain genders? Because it kind of worked the other way around with other roles for men. So I also wanted to be a fighter pilot. I went from wanting to be a firefighter to being a fighter pilot.
Yeah, cool.
And went to the RAF careers evening, and the man laughed at me because I said I wanted to be a pilot, and he said, "Women aren't pilots."
Yeah.
And I was, well, why? What is it that's different about us that means we can't be pilots? And he said, "Well, you just won't be able to, women won't be able to cope with the stress, the pressure. But you can have an admin job. You can stay on the ground and assist the pilots, etc." And so, of course, I wasn't interested in that.
Yeah.
So it was, in terms of going into jobs that women don't normally do, I suppose I don't remember ever consciously thinking that's what I wanted to do. Well, when I look back, it was very much a pattern.
Yeah, so you really wanted to break the mold, and I guess if to fast forward just a few years, you went from graduate Perry's Motor Sales and carving out your early career in the industry to today, where you are highly influential in this space and doing exactly all the things you described as wanting to change the perception around how females are seen in certain industries, in particular the automotive space. So talk to me about your current roles, your business, what you do, and your ambitions, and we'll fill in the gaps between those years. But it'd be interesting to understand where you are today.
Okay, well, currently I'm the chief executive of a small company called Gaia Innovation. I founded that in 2016 with a goal of looking at trying to get the independent ecosystem of employers, schools, and policymakers to work together to actually get children from socially deprived backgrounds the same level of access to exciting careers as others do. And that led me to work with some automotive employers and with the Silverstone Technology Cluster, which is largely kind of advanced technology automotive companies, where we would talk about STEM careers, science, technology, engineering and maths careers to these youngsters. And whilst I was doing that, at the same time, I thought, well, the automotive industry is clearly such a fantastic, I felt a fantastic place to work in. And as I was going into schools and talking to the youngsters, there was occasionally at times when I'd be invited into girls' schools. For example, down in Kent, there are quite a few girls-only grammar schools. So this particular school that I went to, I started out by saying, who wants a career in automotive? Nobody put their hand up. So I then explained about my career. I explained about all the different jobs, that there's a job for everyone and anyone at whatever qualification level, whatever characteristic you have. And at the end of the speech, I said the question again, and about half of the room put their hand up. And so to me, that was a real trigger moment, because it showed that you just need to tell people more about the sector. You particularly need to tell women, and you need to, we need women to be role models to young women to say, look, actually, you can do this, and we enjoy it, and, we bring our skills to the role. It just seemed to be not at all on anyone's career radar. And going back to the other work I did with when I first started the company, it was, you could see that in the boys as well. They just, other than knowing about a vehicle technician or a used car salesperson, they didn't know about anything about the rest of the sector, which was so different to when I joined. Because, the big employers in those days were seen as being Ford and Vauxhall. It was something to aspire to, a blue chip engineering company. And now it just doesn't feature on any of the youngsters' radars. They're all thinking about Facebook and Google and gaming companies, football, betting companies.
Yeah, I mean, technology's become a huge driver, isn't it? Today, youngsters, and I have two younger, I shouldn't say children, they're teenagers, but their vision and outlook is very different from when I was a teenager. Largely because when I was a teenager, we didn't have things like mobile phones and smartphones, so therefore we didn't have access to information like we do today. Whereas they can stay informed at the click of a button right now, like we do today. But I guess it's how they use that and why they use that is the challenge. And you're right. I think the aspirations of the young individuals are very different, because they're seeing people like YouTubers now who make a career out of putting all sorts of random content out, and that earns them a living and does them very well. And sometimes that is an aspiration, which I find hard to understand sometimes. But then I think, from coming from a different time, similar to yourself, grew up in the motor industry, and we've talked about this. it's a very different approach now. And I think it's really hard to inspire young people to think about trades, to think about careers in corporate offices and things that maybe aren't as exciting or glamorous in their mind, because they're seeing people doing what they love, kicking a football around or gaming on YouTube for other people to watch. It's a very different world, isn't it? It's really interesting.
It is. It's what their touch points are. You know, they're encountering very different brands to the ones that we grew up with. There are far more that are targeting them and are interacting with them. So it's a hugely competitive landscape for skills.
Yes.
So, but what you do see though is if you can get them get their attention for a short space of time, by having a real person talk to them that embodies the industry, it does work. You know, we have. I'm still in touch with girls that met me back then that are now have automotive careers, and you know, obviously nothing to do with me other than they found out about the opportunities and then decided to keep telling me each time they'd gone through. You know, I decided to do an engineering degree at university, and now I'm at Rolls-Royce. You know, it's just great to see. So there's a proof to the proof of concept there. It does work.
Yeah.
So while I was doing that, and while this kind of light bulb moment of we really are not engaging with young women enough for the sector to do something about the female representation, and at the same time, I decided to go and visit some of the people that I used to work with in Ford, and at that point they were then leading some of the automotive companies like Mazda and Kia and Volkswagen Group, to say, well, what is your gender balance and why? Because I knew that all of those men, as they were, that were my peers and that knew me really well, you're not sexist or anything. There was nothing that would have made them decide they weren't going to hire women. So why had there been no movement when they got to the top of those organisations? And, the frank response was that they'd not even really thought about it. You know, that they think that by treating people equally and by kind of going out to the recruitment market in an equal opportunities kind of way, they weren't really wondering why the only people that were then hired or promoted were men and white men, basically. So they, the conversation basically went along the lines of, well, clearly that can't make sense. There must be something that we're doing wrong. The brands that we have are obviously only attracting white men, and also there are probably things that we have in place that are excluding other underrepresented groups. So they agreed to join in with what I wanted to do, which was to do something about this and to say, well, we're up against all of these exciting new employers. If we want a sustainable business model for the future, we have to start to widen who we can attract to come and work for us. And let's start with the women, because we're 50% of the population, and if there's only 7% of our business, of the employees in our businesses are female, there's an issue there.
Yeah.
So they agreed to work on their own companies, and I agreed to take responsibility for driving the change across the sector. And that's when the Automotive 30% Club was founded. It was founded with a specific target and a goal, because automotive leaders need an objective. We're all very task-oriented. We need to know that we've made progress in some way. And the goal was to achieve 30% of key leadership positions to be filled by diverse women, as in all types of women, by 2030. And one of the reasons for why 2030 was that because I've got connections kind of at pretty high level across the automotive industry, across the globe, it was clear that something very big is happening, and it was coming. And even back in 2016, although it seemed a long way away, it was in everyone's strategies and plans to move to electrification and alternative fuel vehicles. And so it meant that we really do need to get our house in order by that time. And what I knew as well from my studies at university was that there was work done by Professor Rosabeth Moss-Kanter of Harvard that found way back in the 70s that if you have a majority and you have a minority, the majority dominates the norms of the group, and that it reflects everything around the majority. If the minority reaches 30% or about a third of that group, then that all changes and the group starts to kind of ignore the fact that there's a majority and a minority, and the characteristics of all of the people and all of their contributions are equally valued. So the challenge becomes, if you want to drive a change we want to increase a minority representation in order to tap into the extra contributions those people bring, instead of them being ignored, you have to get to about a third of the team. And of course, the change can be driven more effectively if those 30% have influence over the rest of the business. So hence the target of 30% of key leadership roles by 2030.
Yeah.
From that point, I had about 12 founder members, and then it's grown from then. I originally went round kind of trying to get more people involved, more leaders, the leaders that were already in the company, in the club, started to kind of encourage others as well to join. And just kind of point out that they're all chief executives or MDs, that all of the members of the club are at that level. Because again, knowing what I know about the automotive sector, if the person at the top doesn't truly believe it, they want it to happen, then the rest of the organisation tends to follow that and doesn't necessarily put the energy into something that they think the big boss doesn't really care about. So that's why it was so important to get those leaders on board. But what was eye-opening for me at the time was I didn't have a big brand behind me. I didn't work for Volkswagen Group or Ford or Vertu or anyone. I didn't have a particularly interesting job title, head of global sales or something. I had to rely totally on my own credibility, my own ability to convince, to give a compelling vision, to explain why this was needed. So, I couldn't rely on a position with a big kind of army behind me to say this is why I should do it. So I had to establish that myself. And the other thing was, I did, of course, go around to all of the industry bodies at the time and to say that really they should be doing something. The first approach to this, I didn't think this would have to be done by me. I thought, well, obviously the SMMT will take this up and drive it forward, or obviously the IMI will, or the other industry bodies. And I went to see them all, and all of them said, "No, we don't see the strategic relevance of this. We won't stand in your way, but we're not going to do anything to support." So they wouldn't give inclusion and female representation a seat at the table. So I built my own table. And then I invited people who did think it was important to have seats at that table. And of course, what you will have seen in recent years is that now those industry bodies have decided that they are going to run campaigns. So, we've had our 30 by 30 strategy for some time in the Automotive 30% Club, and then about a year ago, the SMMT announced a 30 by 30 strategy, which, is, I suppose it should be flattered.
Well, yeah, by the title of this show, that lead by, we talked about it off camera, you're leading by example, and you've set out a vision that people are now adopting, and ultimately that comes from your values, beliefs and morals, and absolutely right, to reshape the way the industry is seen and have better quality leadership at all levels across the organisations, and that starts with, as you say, better representation. It's interesting. I had a chat with Luke Broad, brand director at Dacia UK. I'm sure you know him well. We were talking about their challenges in Dacia about getting that balance, and he's working on that. It's a strategic goal for them at the moment to work on getting better representation of females into the business, because actually 50% of their customers are female, and they know that, and they need people that understand the female way of life and their products and bringing that whole story together. So it makes complete sense. But it's clearly something that's on people's agenda now, which must be driven from you and your team and your values and beliefs, which is phenomenal, because when I started in the career, it was, as you described, very white male heavy, and it had all those typical stereotypes that sat with the industry. And it was only later in my career, probably a decade or more into my career, when I started to see more females at really high profile positions, but that was more at OEM level in the corporate offices, not at retailer level. So there was still a real disconnect between the two. So what I love to see now is there's a lot more opportunity in the retailer groups and at retailer level. So you're seeing a lot of salespeople, women now presenting products who are gurus, and you've got females, showroom managers, general managers, dealer principals, all the titles, and it's a step change from where I started my career over 20 years ago. So that's all thanks to the light you're shining and driving that message. So in terms of your ambition, what does that generically look like across the automotive space at the moment? How are you on terms of target for 30%?
Well, last year, when we did our data collection exercise, we found that we were, across the membership, at 27% of key leadership roles already, and 29% of the entire workforce, which is a lot bigger. I think the last numbers I saw published for the entire sector, not the member groups, was 7% in leadership and 17% in the entire sector.
That's great.
So you can see we very much lead the way in terms of who the member companies are and what they are doing, which you would hope it would, because these are people who've made a commitment to do this and acknowledge it needs to be done. There'll be many in the other part that aren't members, that, as I say, don't see it as a strategically relevant thing to do, but they will be left behind because, of course, the talent pool is only a certain size, and if there's going to be a certain part of the entire UK talent pool allocated to automotive, the ones that are the best employers and that are more inclusive and are better places to work for a broader variety of people will win out in the battle for skills.
Yes.
And we know that we have a massive skills deficit issue in the sector. So I think this is the reason why some of the industry bodies are now putting importance on it, because they've realised that the way to solve the skills deficit is to actually be able to employ more people.
Yeah.
As in a broader set of people, instead of trying to convince a certain population that we're still relevant for them. But yeah, I think it's in terms of as you mentioned, the title of the podcast, Lead By. That was one of my key learning points at that time, was that when nobody else stepped forward to take responsibility, I did. So I took responsibility for making it happen. And I think that's a key leadership trait.
For sure.
Which perhaps I didn't realise I had until that point, when it's frustrated me so much that no one else would do the people that you think have got the power and influence, that would obviously just take responsibility, didn't want to. And so that's why I stepped forward. But the people within the membership also took responsibility, were accountable for their own organisations, but clearly because they worked for a particular brand, they would not be able to drive a cross-sector campaign, because of the competition and the fact that people wouldn't necessarily want to come to something that a certain brand had built, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
So it had to lie. The responsibility had to lie with somebody that wasn't tied strongly to one company. And at the time, I was the only person that decided that I would do it.
Yeah, which is fantastic. And you were saying earlier, just to reference back to something you said about your earlier career, when you were visiting university schools and doing the STEM work, you were saying that some people would go off and find a career, but you didn't necessarily think it was because of you. It was just you giving awareness to the industry's opportunity. I would challenge that and say that actually one of the key reasons people probably took those opportunities was because of you, because of the inspiration you created as a strong female, making change, having a voice and being heard. And that's exactly what you're doing today, is making sure the message is clear and coming from a very different perspective that people won't have heard or seen before. And for me, that's the key part of a strong leader, is being visionary, being authentic, and empowering people with a trusted message so that they can make their own decisions, but it's backed by something that has substance. And clearly that's what you have in your career, and your life's work so far is very much dedicated to putting the right people in the right positions. So I've got a question for you on that topic. Leadership, what does it mean to you in a broad sense? What is leadership, and what does it mean to you?
It's changed actually over time, because I think you take on the practices of the culture that you're raised in, if you know what I mean. So, yes. Right, when I first started out in the industry, I worked in the retail side, and then I worked in production at Dagenham for Ford, and then moved into marketing and sales and Ford. The style of leadership that I encountered was very much command and control. It was very much so. There's the grown-ups, and everyone is the minions, and the instructions come down from on high. Sometimes you never even see this mythical figure that is the leader of the organisation, other than everyone's kind of afraid of doing anything wrong. And I remember a story that Ian McAllister, who was the chairman of Ford at the time I worked in Ford, saying that what he hadn't realised, that when somebody put a report on his desk, and he would think, well, this is interesting, but I wonder why this bit is saying that, and he'd send it back, and then there would be a team of about 20 people working for about 2 weeks to find the answer to that musing that he'd had, and to create a whole deck of slides that would answer the question. And he hadn't realised that until somebody kind of shone a light on it and explained why Pat's productivity wasn't how it should be. Be careful what you ask for, because in that culture, if the boss says he wants to know something, everybody has to get the answer for it. Yeah. So when I set up my business, I suppose, with hindsight, I probably took a wrong move, because I would, I think I'm going to be the boss. This is the rules. I'm going to hire this team. They're all going to be given their tasks. They're going to play a role in this. And I suppose what I've learned maybe in the past couple of years is that that doesn't really suit me. And it certainly doesn't suit the modern employee either, of being, everyone needs clarity in what they want to do, but kind of striving for perfection and expecting 150% all the time of people doesn't necessarily get the results that you want. So I've been much more interested in kind of a move I've made in the past couple of years, is to become much more leading from the middle. if I can describe that. And it's because it's how I've led the club. When you're not, if you haven't got an official leadership role, you haven't got any stripes, I couldn't take 72 automotive CEOs and start to instruct them in a command and control way. I had to lead from the middle of them, like creating a huddle, like a football coach does. And it's almost like you flatten the structure so that there is only that, you're kind of talking in a circle rather than a triangle, if you understand. And use their collective intelligence to solve a challenge or to decide what to do. So it struck me when I was working at Dagenham, there was once an issue. They had a problem, and so they flew in engineers from all over the world to tackle this problem. And I was there, to coordinate the output, take the notes of it all. And they went around, they created a room where they put all of the process or the challenges on the walls as they went around, and they were all walking around and writing on it, and there's me trying, because no mobile phones with cameras in those days, trying to capture the things that they were saying. But the process they went through, I thought, that's fascinating. That is really high performing people, because these were the chief engineers of the Ford Global organization. Highly performing people working together, bringing their collective intelligence together to solve the problem. They were there for 6 hours, and they'd sorted it. I thought, that is absolutely the way to go. So, and I then saw this again happen when I was an ambassador for the Silverstone Technology Cluster. There was a meeting of the engineering companies, and they were rising to the challenge of the skills deficit in their little advanced technology companies. So I was invited along as being the person that knows about schools and education and skills, apprenticeships, etc. And they did the same process. I thought, this is still happening and still really effective. As they're all kind of, there's the problem. The problem is there, and we all walk around it to find and look at it to find the solution. And it's all very visual as well. And it's all very, as I say, it's a flat structure. There is no, I'm more important than you in this. There were different levels of people, company owners, chief engineers, all working together without stripes. And so I thought, well, that is actually how I'm going to operate the club, in this way of, we have challenges. We have issues in terms of we're not the employer of choice. We have issues in terms of we don't promote enough women into senior roles. What is going on? And so you bring the people together to use their collective intelligence to create a solution. Mm-hmm. So what I'm doing is I'm convening the brains, and I'm providing the forum for it. So somebody has to take responsibility for providing the forum for this process to happen. And that therefore becomes the role of the leader of that task.
Yeah.
And so that's how I see modern, it's transformational leadership. It's you set a compelling vision, you gather the resources and the team around, and then you bring it out of them, what the solution is. And that is something that, as I say, I've learned that only really, it's all kind of fallen into place in the past few years. I would not have thought about it in that way, or been able to kind of see it and articulate it in that way until quite recently.
And I absolutely agree with you. I think it's really clear to see that those companies making real progress are reducing their restrictions around perfection. So the things that are holding them back are when they are absolutely wedded to finalizing a product at 150%. They're also trying to cascade a message from 2 or 3 people at board level down to a workforce of hundreds or thousands. And actually, as you say, the more effective result is middle out or bottom up collaborative approach, which is truly transformational, because let's not forget, we're hiring people for a reason. You know, in the industry, they're hired because they bring a talent and a unique set of skills and a personality and behavior traits that are truly unique, that add value. Otherwise, they shouldn't have been hired. That's the ultimate. So if they're there for a reason, we've got to embrace these skills and make sure those people have a voice and have some impact on the overall goals. So I absolutely agree with you. I think it's clear to see in some of the more junior startups, they take and adopt that approach now. And that's why their products go to market quicker. They're more profitable quickly. And, they're truly disruptors amongst the legacy companies.
Yeah.
So it's a big sea change, and something that I think is a formula that now should become the norm. And we'll start to see that traditional command and control top-down approach tend to wean itself out, because it's just not something that fits today's world, where we have hybrid working and digital activations, and we've got technology. And ultimately, a lot of the automotive companies are technology companies at heart now, because of the product they're selling and the way we're operating. So it's a really different set of rules now to what it used to be. Certainly in my career, no doubt the same for you. So it is a different ball game, requires lots of different leadership style. So coming back to, again, your career, when you started out, would you be honest enough to say that leadership then was what you described, that command and control, and did you see yourself venturing that way? And was there a point where you recognised this isn't working?
Yeah, as I say, working in an OEM, it is absolutely a command and control structure, or it certainly was then when I was working in it. You just have to look at some of the job titles that we have in the sector. In the factory, they were called, the people in charge of the teams were called superintendents. Yeah. And we had we have financial controllers and work controllers. The words are very command and control.
Yeah.
So the change that needs to happen in the sector is very much moving from this power culture, the role culture, and into much more of a, understanding that because we're all doing tasks very well, it is actually a task-oriented culture that you need in place, and a structure that enables that to happen without you falling back into the role culture by mistake. So absolutely, my leadership style when I was starting out was definitely, well, that's how it's done. That's how I should be. And, quite tough and firm, and quite tough now as well. But in terms
Focused.
Of kind of expectations, and of course within an organisation where everyone is highly talented, that's quite easy to be. It's quite easy because you can say this needs to be done by then, this to this standard, right, first time, every time, on time, was the mantra at Ford, which I'd still agree with. And it would be. Whereas what you find when you're then going to market yourself or employees yourself to try and find people that are of that talent, that are willing to come and work for a very small company, is hard. And so you can't necessarily push them or have the same high expectations as you were able to enjoy in a company that had such a big brand to support it, to get the best people.
I think when you run your own company,
my style is developed on having been exposed to other companies and other ways of working.
Yes, and I think when you run your own company as you do, you can't help but be so connected to what you're going after by virtue of being the owner founder, that sometimes it's hard to let go, isn't it? And this is not just you, this is all walks of life. Everybody that owns their own business or what is truly focused on an ambition, it's really hard to let go of that if you want something so bad. And I think, again, what we all learn over time in leadership roles is that excellence and progression comes from letting go of the reins a little bit sometimes, and empowering people through great storytelling and giving them reason and creating that vision, which is clearly what you've done, because as you described, you weren't in a position where you could tell people what to do with the industry, but yet here we are 8 or more years on, having reshaped the way that leadership and female leadership is seen in the industry, which is phenomenal, and the numbers speak for themselves. So let's go back to you and your personal journey. What's next for you in terms of your leadership? How do you keep yourself relevant and stay up to speed with being the best version of yourself? What sort of education do you do, or what moments of reflection do you take?
I don't do any formal education. I don't think many people in our industry has the time. We're in this vicious circle of, we could perhaps do with improving our competence, but we're so busy being slightly incompetent that we haven't got time to then become more competent. It's this circle that we're all spinning around. But what I do, obviously I read a lot, and the fact that I wrote my book, meant I trawled through many reports and research studies, because I always my approach in life has always been, if I want to be if I want people to listen to me about something, I have to become an expert in it, and there is no I need to know a bit about that. It's I have to be an expert, and so I go into everything to become that expert. And at that point in time, my expertise needed to be about increasing female representation and all the issues that went around it. I didn't know about that until I decided I had to write a book in order to explain what to do. Because we need when you wanted to drive change, you have to know how to do something.
Well, I think you prompted a thought in my mind, and what you were talking about, if I think about a transformational or change management process, something like ADCAR, which is about making sure that people are aware of change and they acknowledge the change, and there's a desire for it. There's a format to transformational journeys and change. So I think what you were starting to say really rung a bell for me, because it's if you really want people to make a difference and you want to lead by example, you've got to accept that. You've got to get buy-in, and you've got to explain why someone is doing it. And ultimately, that's not just at a group level, that's at individual level. What is their contribution and how can they make it happen? So I think that's something we deal with a lot in Izini and Ignition, our other sibling company. This is truly what makes a difference. And for leaders, what helps them make that transition from the command and control into something that's more strategic, because they start to think about the individual as opposed to just the top line. So it's an interesting thought. When
you, as you said, when you own your own company, you are you're responsible for everything. You are the chief financial officer, chief marketing officer, you're the CEO. You are everything. And you obviously have to employ people to do certain parts, but you have to take ownership for all of that. The one thing that cannot be delegated, other than finance, the one thing that cannot be delegated is communications. So this is a thing I've learned. I actually learned that quite early on in terms of when I was an HR employee relations officer at the Dagenham plant. Mm-hmm. It was so critical that when you were in discussions with the unions, that you took the minutes, because you took control of the communication that came out of what was discussed. So I learned at that point, communicate, control the communication. That's really important. And so that, when I then moved out of that and worked in marketing, it was evidence how important communications it is. And then moving into my own company, I am the person now still that does all of the marketing, all of the media, all of this, the social media posts, etc. Because I want to control exactly the tone, the vibe, how it's said, when it's said, and so therefore being an effective communicator out to the world as well as with your team is so important. Obviously in a bigger company you could probably hire in an expert, but I would still be working with that expert and saying this is how it needs to be for this brand to work, because, as I say, leading the communications is so important.
Well, what you're talking about is, in essence, company culture. You're running a smaller organisation, but if you were talking about a big corporate, what you're describing there is the essence of company culture, because your tone of voice and how you want the business to be perceived and seen all stems back to the values, morals, beliefs. So the things that are written on the walls, the things that are said in the halls, it's that stuff that has to be absolutely clear and crystal clear for the outward message. And for you, because you're running a smaller organisation, that comes from you, and rightly so. I guess the challenge would be when you upscale, if you were getting bigger, how do you empower someone coming into the team to take a senior role and truly believe and understand what you're saying and be able to replicate that? That there lies the real challenge, because you can't always be the master of everything. And that, I think this is where in automotive, a lot of, particularly at retail level, they fall down. I've seen it in sales managers and dealer principals. They're trying to be the master of everything and in control, but it doesn't work. They've got to empower people to rise up and take a step and do more, and trust them to have a voice. It's really tricky. And as I said earlier, when you're a passionate business owner in particular, it's really hard to say, yes, that person gets everything. And I had this conversation with another guest recently, Alexandra Wood, who runs a bespoke men's tailoring company. And she was saying it's really hard to attract talent in the early days who totally get the essence of what she's doing, because it's so specific. And the clients she's dealing with are really high profile. So if the tonality is wrong and the vision for the future is incorrect, that can be damaging in all levels. So it's communication, and being clear in that communication is so important. And the earlier that can be said and done, the better, because again, people like that forward warning. So in terms of the industry, we know the 2030 goals for electrification is crucial. The more we know about that now, the more likely we are to influence change. And from a leader's perspective, the more likely they can put good strategic goals and ambitions in place. So on that thought, what other traits, competencies, behaviours do you think are absolutely essential in today's world? Bearing in mind it is really in a term, VUCA, that sort of uncertain and challenging time we live in. What traits, behaviours and competencies do we need to have?
I think it kind of also builds on the question that you asked earlier, but I don't think I answered as effectively as I should have done, which is about how do you develop your own skills. So the first thing is that leaders need to be permanently developing their skills. But the way that I do that is I mix with other leaders all the time. So it's this exposure to people that maybe are very different to you, that are running different types of organisations, but they have that kind of approach, and someone else has that kind of style. So exposing you, having this exposure to people that you can respect and admire, I think is a really critical point. The other point is being kept up to date with what's happening in the automotive sector. So the sector is an incredibly complicated ecosystem. I've been working in it for over 30 years, and I'm still discovering little parts that I didn't know existed. The whole kind of value chain that comes about, not only from the manufacturing and engineering side, but the whole distribution and repair and aftermarket. To understand the ecosystem is very important, because when we have change, when something like a cataclysmic event happens, it sends waves through the entire ecosystem to the point where it's a bit like the butterfly flapping its wing, as analogy. If Stellantis flaps its wings, something happens, and at the end of the chain, some business goes out of business because of it. So making sure that you're constantly aware of what's going on in the wider ecosystem. The way I do that is I'm a vice president of an organisation called the Automotive Leaders Network, which is people that come from all sorts of parts, mainly kind of clustered around the retail part of the sector. And we bring guest speakers in where we talk about what's, electrification or the political environment, what's happening with the US election. It's all very kind of mind-broadening. And it enables leaders to kind of look up from their day job and really see the context within which they're operating. So I think that's a really important leadership trait, this kind of forever learning, but learning from being, having your eyes open.
Yes.
And listening to what other people are saying. And of course, I'm doing the same with the Automotive, the Percent Club, my 72 leaders in that. So I'm talking to, and every conversation I have with them, I'll start with what's happening in the business, what's the biggest challenge that you're facing, or what's going well, etc. So this kind of openness to learning. I think also, as a leader, you have to be looking at people in terms of helping them fulfill their potential. So to put resources in, to invest in people, it's very frustrating when you offer opportunities and people don't take them up, and it's like, well, you could have developed a skill further there, but some people are just very focused on the job they're doing at that point in time, and not necessarily building potential for the future. So you have to be able to spot people with potential, and you have to give them the training and development that will help them meet that potential. And that's the way I think that the industry can adapt to the economic turbulence that's happening. A leader needs to be able to change direction quickly, steer a very kind of calm course, not be overwhelmed by the unbelievable complexity and changes that are happening, and try to control and determine the environment rather than simply reacting to it as well. Taking strategic steps forward to build resilience. And I actually think that there's been too much emphasis in the past decade or so about individuals building resilience. You must be more resilient, particularly in the conversations with women. And it's not the person that needs to be resilient, it's the system that needs to be resilient. A leader needs to build a resilient organisation that's well trained. Everyone knows what they're doing. So in a crisis, they all just rush to do what they need to do. That's something that I observed from years of a father and a brother in the fire service, is like 75% of their time as a firefighter is training. So that when it comes to a crisis, when a Grenfell Tower happens, they all just rush to do the job they're trained to do. There's no question in it. There's no, should I really be running into this burning building? It's what they're trained to do. And then when you saw the footage of the firefighters afterwards, with those kind of the faces of them sat there, people like, they're so traumatized. They actually probably weren't traumatized. They were just exhausted because the adrenaline had been going for so long. They've been putting in everything that their training had told them to do. And that is what I see as being the right thing to do, to build a structure and an organisation that has the resilience in the way that it builds the talent and the skills of the people, so that when we have to change or we have to rise to a challenge or transform, we all then just get on and do it without feeling stressed or overwhelmed. Probably feel more excited about it than we do afraid of it.
Yes, that totally makes sense. And I think that's why, like it or love it, a lot of people draw references to sports in these type of leadership examples, because there's a huge element of needing to be a coach in today's modern leadership. You've got to have the ability to stand strong and coach and guide people to draw the best out of your team and your people. So the similes are there, I get it. But also it's it goes back to what you were just saying about being prepared. The very best sports people turn up for training every week. They train, they do the same drills, they're ready for action. And when that big tournament comes along, they're deployed and they go and they give it their all and they come together, and the coach brings that to life through great guidance and inspirational conversations and stories. And I think you can understand why there is that often the draw between, go back to the old car days, it's always referencing football, but I get it. I'm not a huge football fan. I shouldn't admit it, but I get it. I get the similes. And today, with the challenges of what we've come out of COVID, we've now working very differently in remote sense, hybrid working, electrification in products in the automotive industry. The draw on people is so different. It does require someone that is more visionary, can have this ability to coach and inspire people. And I really think that's something that's very difficult to teach people. And what you just said is really important to labour. I think you gain the most amount of knowledge by surrounding yourself with like-minded people, or being put in a position of slight discomfort where you have to step outside your comfort zone. So going into one of the club meets or going into a leadership event or seminar is a great place to pick up some really quick wins and understand what it takes to be at your best as a leader, because you can't get all of it from the textbooks. A lot of people come to resources like ours and podcasts and videos because, again, you get an essence of someone's career and where they've had failure and where they've had learning points. But ultimately, surrounding yourself with like-minded people who understand what it takes is a powerful way to learn. I totally agree with you.
And not necessarily like-minded.
Well, there is that.
There's quite often, there's a certain individual who I won't name, who it's really the opposite of me. Mm. And yet I learn so much from him, because it's like, oh yeah, it's like we just looked at something from a completely different perspective, because we're coming at it from such a different starting point. So I actually think people that are, yes, like-minded in terms of wanting to develop
overall vision, yeah.
Probably totally different in terms of what their mindset usually is. That's where you learn the most.
Yeah, and that's ultimately the mentor recipe. High performing senior execs go for exec coaching and mentors out of industry for that very reason. They want a different perspective and they need a different approach, because perhaps they need to change something they're doing. And we'll see more and more of that as time goes on, the way the world is today with the demand on us. In general, diversity, equality and inclusion, I've talked about this with other guests. Do you think that that topic is well represented in the automotive space and genuinely represented? Because there is a view that sometimes it can become a bit of a checklist. So with that in mind, what do leaders need to do to make sure that is real and it's embraced for the right reasons?
I think one of the challenges is that people have created a label that says diversity, equity and inclusion, EDI. Let's hire an EDI specialist because we're a role culture and somebody has to do this, and let's hire someone and then put them in the most stressful position of trying to do it all for the entire company. So I try to make it clear that the Automotive 30% Club is not an EDI movement. We are a movement that is about getting the best people into the automotive sector. And we have by acknowledging that something must be wrong for us to have so few women, because we know that there are just as many high-performing women in the population as there are men, then we are, we have barriers up for certain talent pools. So the priority of the 30% Club starts with, well, if we can start to change things to try and get the 50% of the population that currently isn't getting in, we can also have conversations about all the other related issues to a talent strategy. Mm-hmm. So the Automotive 30% Club is about having a talent strategy to rise to the challenge of business transformation needed for the future, and understanding that if you get a broad variety of people in an organisation, then they will have more innovation, they'll be more creative because they've got these different perspectives, as I just kind of described. So the challenge is very much, don't separate out EDI as though it's a separate task. The EDI is something that flows through everything that you do. So all it is it's looking at your people objectives and thinking, we must do this. But every task that we do, such as let's recruit, I don't know, let's say, for example, a sales executive. Are we making sure that we have a strong employer brand? That employer brand going into the recruitment market will be attractive to men and women and people of colour, and different sexualities. Is there something about the way we present ourselves that would be something that certain populations would not find attractive to? Because so having that mindset of looking at everything that you do with regards to your people and your customers as acknowledging that people are different and that you have to be trying to making sure that you're not putting people off or not creating barriers is just the leadership mindset that needs to flow through everything that the organisation does. So it's very tempting for what is a task-oriented industry to say, okay, well, it's a task, so let's set you up as the person that drives that task and we'll all just get on with other things happening and then expect you to have delivered it. That's not how it works. That's why the leaders of the Automotive 30% Club, leaders within it, are all CEOs, because they are the person that has to have that on their balanced scorecard. They have to have the metrics that would be showing that they are not defaulting to a male version of everything when they are doing anything to do with the people strategy, because that is what we have been doing. We've defaulted to a white male version of what is talent, what does talent look like, because that's what we've had in the past. Our technicians have been white men, our leaders have been white men, but we have to try and put that to one side and say, well, okay, we're probably going to still get those. So what else do we need to do to make sure that what we're doing, it also works for women and people of colour, etc.
Yes.
So that's what I think they need to do to drive inclusion in the sector.
Why
I actually hate the term EDI. People say, "Oh, are you an EDI expert?" It's like, no, I'm not. The essence of it really is about inclusion. The E and the D is the next bit. So the inclusion, it's so important that you start out with a concept of, we're not going to exclude any talent, we're not going to exclude any customer by what we're doing. We need to therefore include. And then the equity bit is an understanding that to include people, you have to treat people differently, because for everyone has, everyone's got different burdens, everyone's got different things that they're carrying with them that might mean that they don't react in the same way. And then the diversity that's the kind of people that you're bringing in. So there is a kind of a different way of looking, of really understanding what EDI is.
A great way of looking at it. Yeah, I absolutely get that, and it makes complete sense. If you were going back in time and you were starting your career again, what things would you like to see, or what would you like to advocate to make sure that the industry took an organic growth and we'd see all these ambitions that you want come to life? What do you think is missing at the moment, or what do we need to embrace more of that you perhaps didn't see back then?
I think one of the things that I've learned is that we have high levels of populations of neurodiverse people in the sector. And I think all of us are learning much more about neurodiversity now and the different forms that it takes. So when you're driving change, or when you're trying to react to change or respond positively to change, it's so important that you understand that there will be neurodiverse people in your employment population, and that they will have a very different approach to being told to change. So, some people will see it as been something they simply cannot do, that they have what they're in control of what they have and what they do, and now suddenly that is moving, and it causes terrible dissonance and stress for those people. Some people will find it very anxiety inducing just to be told something is going to happen without really knowing what is that thing that's going to happen. So the first descriptor was more of somebody that maybe has autism. The second one is more of somebody that has ADHD. We know that we have a lot of people with that in the sector, and it's fantastic that we do, because they're so good at their jobs, and people, there's a lot of population out there that we can tap into because we're clearly a great home for them. But what we need to be very aware of is that, as a neurotypical person, it's issuing an instruction that to not expect the same response as you would from a neurotypical person. I'll just give a classic example. Is if you say to somebody, if you're in a position of authority and you say to somebody with ADHD, I'd like to have a word with you later today, and you don't say why, that person is likely to spend all day feeling really anxious about something they may have said, something that, what is it going to be? And in fact, it was you just being a bit lazy in not bothering to explain the topic of the meeting. So if we actually all think as leaders and imagine that all of our population is neurodiverse, I think the way that we would then communicate and engage with our workers would be more effective, because the neurotypical people would just go along with it. Being told what the subject of a meeting is not going to hurt the neurotypical person. So I think that's one of the things that I think as leaders moving forward, we should see these people as, they do have a kind of superpower in their ability to work in our sector. They bring so much positive contribution that we really do owe it to them to manage them effectively and lead them effectively.
Yeah, another great point, Julia. And I think that actually by being more in tune with that, it makes you a better leader, because you are thinking about what you're saying and the impact more than you would have ever done before. And as you say, globally, it doesn't change anything. Actually, it just enhances the culture of the company and enhances the way you lead. So I think that's a great point. So my final question for you before you have to go, going back again in your early career, would you undo any of what you've achieved so far? Would you change industry now, knowing what you know?
No, absolutely not. Well, I've always loved working in the industry. And I'm never a person that regrets what I've done. I am somebody that constantly overanalyzes and reflects. I'll probably this evening tonight I'll be should have said that, should have said that. Just constantly picking post-mortem of everything but I don't regret it. It's like, well, that, because you don't know what would have happened if you'd have taken a different route, or if you'd made a different choice. You live with the choice and the steps that you make. So, I made the step into the sector. I've always found it a home that I feel I have a sense of belonging to. I wouldn't have set up a campaign to improve it, if I didn't feel that I cared about it. So absolutely no regrets.
So we can thank the RAF, we can thank the fire service for being stereotypical at the time, but actually that nudge was the catalyst for you to have a huge influence over change and be truly transformative for the industry, which we thank you for. Because it shines a light on something that's so important, that it's about putting great people into these positions of all walks of life. That's the important part. So before I say goodbye and thank you for your time, is there a lasting impression you can leave for other leaders out there of all industries? What couple of hints and tips would you give an aspiring leader today? Someone's about to take their first step up into a senior role. What would you say they have to think about or have in mind?
I would I would have in mind somebody that you've seen in any walk of life that you actually think, yeah, I'd quite like to have that positive impact. Not that you're going to be like them, because you should always be your own self, but that you can see that they're having a positive impact, and so you want to follow in their footsteps on that. But I would also be saying you need to look at you have to have a meaning and a purpose in life. You have to have a mission. You have to know what it is that will bring you soul fulfillment, and you need to go towards it. So you need to leave behind people that drain you or things that you don't find fulfill you, to move towards the things that do.
Brilliant. So being truly inspirational is a key for those in role right now, making sure that we're leading by example, going back to the very title of this podcast, making sure that we shine a light on what it takes to be the best of the best. And Julia, thank you once again for giving up your time and sharing your insights and your experience. And we wish you and your team the best of luck with your future ambitions, and we hope to see it really come to life in the next couple of years. So once again, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks.
Pleasure speaking with you.